Hey everyone, it's Dan here. I want to say thank you guys so much for all your awesome comments on the ice cream video. That one was super fun to produce. We've got a bunch more coming, so tune in another week from now for the next one. But I wanted to answer a few of the questions that we saw in the comments. Tons of awesome ice cream questions, and there's so much science to it that I couldn't get everything in the video. You guys brought up some awesome points. So I have my notes here. I just want to run through a few. The first one was what happens when you add alcohol to an ice cream base. So you see some flavors that are, maybe rum raisin, or people get creative and add things like Campari to an ice cream base. And alcohol can be awesome in an ice cream base, but what it actually does in terms of texture is pretty profound. It also lowers the freezing point of the base. So in a similar fashion to sugar, so if you're adding alcohol to an ice cream base, you can usually get away with a tablespoon or two with no problem, no additional changes needed to your ice cream base. If you want to go above that because you want more alcohol flavor, you can run into some issues with it being too soupy right out of the freezer, not getting hard enough. And so what you want to do there, you have a couple of options. One is you can pre-cook the alcohol, so on the stovetop, and actually drive off some of that alcohol so you can keep the flavor of that booze without as much alcohol in there, so it won't depress the freezing point as much. Another option is to balance out how much alcohol you add by bringing the sugar amount down. So we know from the video that sugar depresses the freezing point. So if you use a little less sugar, you can get away with a little bit more alcohol. So you just kind of have to play with those ratios to get something that works for you. So I had another question kind of around that same thing about freezing point depression. Someone wanting to make a more savory ice cream, and could you substitute salt in for the sugar? So yes and no is the answer to that. So sugar does depress the freezing point. It actually depresses it more than sugar does because sodium chloride separates into those two ions, sodium and chloride. And freezing point depression is all about the number of particles that you dissolve in the liquid. So with the same amount of salt, you'd actually dissolve more particles into it and depress the freezing point even more. So in that way, yes, salt would work. The only problem is you'd be replacing, in this particular recipe, a third of a cup of sugar plus the sweetness that you're getting from the corn syrup and that freezing point depression with salt. So you'd end up with something that's really, really salty. So I haven't really experimented to try and figure out if you can actually make a truly savory ice cream. My guess is it's going to be pretty difficult to get the freezing point depression with just salt. It's probably going to be unbearably salty. But that's a really good question. Okay, next one up is about air. So someone mentioned that they watched an episode of Chef's Table where they were talking about how air is one of the most important components of ice cream, and that is absolutely true. So it's not something I really got into in the video, which I'll explain why in a second here. But air in an ice cream base is super important, and it's incorporated during the churning process. And the amount of air that you get in there is called the overrun, technically speaking. And so for an ice cream base, if you doubled the volume of the ice cream base during the churning process, that would be an ice cream that is 100% overrun. So it's increased by 100% over the original volume of the ice cream base. And so you can have ice cream bases that are, or finished ice creams that are 20% overrun all the way up to 100%. So basically for the same amount of ice cream, you're going to have less volume of actual ice cream base in there. The rest is going to be made up of air as you go up on that scale. And so for your premium ice creams, you see that they generally have lower overruns, so less air in there. It often makes them more expensive, but also makes them more dense. And they can have, what a lot of people like is a nicer texture. Sometimes if you get a ton of overrun, you get something that is really light and fluffy. It doesn't taste as rich and dense. The reason I didn't really talk about it in the video is it's something that at home you really don't have much control over. So a lot of it has to do with how fast your dasher moves. That's the blade that spins in there. If it spins faster during churning, you're going to incorporate more air, have a higher overrun. But the interesting thing is even at scoop shops where they use batch freezers, they don't have full control over overrun either. It depends on how much they fill the container. Again, the speed of that dasher. The only people that have full control over overrun are big producers that are using continuous freezers. So they can actually on a screen dial in the exact amount of air percentage that they want incorporated. So they have full control. But below that, no one has total control over it. So it's a little bit out of your hands. So the next question was about adding fresh fruit to an ice cream base and that it can be problematic because of all the water that you're introducing. And that is absolutely true. We know that water is a very sensitive thing in an ice cream base, and adding, say, fresh strawberries is going to introduce a lot of water to the mix. So I actually kind of ran into this problem when I was developing recipes, and I came up with a strawberry ripple ice cream, which we'll put a link to in this video at the bottom so you can access it. And in there, I kind of got around the situation by using freeze-dried strawberries and fresh strawberries, and I basically combined them in a blender, blend them up, and the freeze-dried strawberries help trap some of that free water that we get out of the strawberries. I add sugar to that to sweeten it so that the syrup basically, it won't get icy when it freezes at all. And so what I do is I make a sweet cream ice cream base, very much like the one I showed in the video, but without the vanilla. And then I layer in this awesome, super rich strawberry syrup, and then freeze it. So when you scoop it, you get this kind of ripple of strawberry throughout. And so I would totally recommend checking that out. You get tons of strawberry flavor with no issues with texture. But I think you could probably have good luck using freeze-dried strawberries in the base itself, probably along with fresh if you wanted to actually make a strawberry ice cream like that. All right, so the next one is, Dan, what's your favorite ice cream flavor and why? So I have two kind of favorites, and vanilla is actually one of my favorite flavors. And that might sound boring, but to me, vanilla is anything but boring, especially if you're using really good vanilla beans. It's super complex flavor, really, really love it. So I would recommend, or I don't recommend, I like vanilla ice cream. I love it, and I love stuff in it, like the peanut butter cups or chocolate chips. That's probably my number one go-to. My second favorite flavor is the burnt caramel ice cream at Toscanini's, which is an incredible ice cream shop here in Boston. And Gus Rencontor, who's the ice cream wizard over there, he just takes that caramel to almost too dark, so it's really, it takes down the sweetness a lot, and it's like that, just a hint of bitterness balanced with the sweetness in the ice cream. It's so addicting, and I'm not the only one. It's like their most popular flavor. So I'd say vanilla and burnt caramel are my faves. And the last question I want to get into, I saw a few folks ask about eggs and egg yolks specifically in recipes. The one I presented in the video and that we linked to does not contain eggs. And that's really because when I went to ice cream college, I found that a lot of commercial producers, they will sometimes make egg ones if they want to make a custard style ice cream. More often than not, they're solving kind of the water issues without using eggs. And if they use eggs, it's because they want that custardy, eggy kind of flavor to it. I love them, and I developed a recipe for Cooks Illustrated years ago for a really rich custard base. And so we're going to link to that also below this video, so you can check that out. And egg yolks are amazing. So they, when you cook them in the mix there, they bind up and trap water in a gel. Along the same lines of what we're using that cornstarch for. So they do a great job. And if you want to use egg yolks for that nice custardy flavor, you totally can, and we'll have that recipe below. But I really kind of like doing it with the cornstarch. You get this kind of cleaner flavor. It's more about the dairy flavor and less about custard flavor, but totally a preference thing, and on any given day, you might want one or the other. Anyway, so thank you guys so much. I love all the comments. Please keep them coming, and stay tuned. I'm so psyched. We got 2 episodes down. We're doing 13 episodes in this series run, so there's a ton of really cool stuff coming up. So let me know what you think. Thanks. Bye.